August 4th, 1962. Marilyn Monroe was screaming on the phone. "3 men are standing outside my window and they're coming to kill me." The world's most famous woman was experiencing mortal terror during her final phone call to the only man she truly loved, Joe DiMaggio. 2 hours later, Joe's taxi arrived at Marilyn's Brentwood mansion to find police cars, ambulances, and reporters everywhere. Marilyn was dead, but Joe's investigation into her murder would reveal a shocking conspiracy that reached the highest levels of American government. This is the story of Marilyn Monroe's final phone call, the 3 men who came to silence her forever, and how Joe DiMaggio spent the rest of his life proving that America's sweetheart was murdered by the people she trusted. 11:30 p.m. Joe DiMaggio was alone in his San Francisco hotel room when his phone rang. He heard Marilyn's voice. They had been married for 1 year from 1954 to 1955, but even after their divorce, Marilyn always called him when she was scared or in trouble. "Joe? They're here." Marilyn's voice was shaking with terror. "I can see them through my bedroom window. 3 men in dark suits standing by a black car. They've been watching my house for an hour." Joe sat up in bed, immediately alert. "Marilyn, calm down and tell me exactly what you see." "There are 3 men outside my house. They're not even hiding. They want me to know they're there. One of them is pointing at my bedroom. Joe, I think they're going to kill me tonight." Joe had heard Marilyn's dramatic stories before, but this time there was something different in her voice. She wasn't being theatrical or seeking attention. She was genuinely terrified. "Marilyn, call the police right now. Tell them there are trespassers on your property." "I can't call the police, Joe. These men work for the government. The police won't help me. Nobody will help me except you." Joe was confused. "What do you mean they work for the government? Which government? I know things about President Kennedy and his brother Bobby that could destroy them. I'm writing everything in a diary. Names, dates, conversations I heard at White House parties. Now they want to silence me before I can tell anyone what I know." Joe realized this conversation was more serious than he had initially thought. "Marilyn, what kind of things do you know about the Kennedys?" "I can't explain everything over the phone. But Joe, both Jack and Bobby have been using me to gather information about people in Hollywood who might be communists. They're also sharing classified government secrets with organized crime bosses in exchange for political support." Joe felt a chill run down his spine. If what Marilyn was saying was true, she possessed information that could bring down the most powerful family in American politics. "Joe, I need you to come to Los Angeles right now. I'm going to give you my diary and all the photographs I have. If something happens to me tonight, I want the truth to come out." "Nothing is going to happen to you, Marilyn. I'm getting on the next flight to Los Angeles. Lock all your doors and don't let anyone in until I get there." "Joe, I can see them walking toward my front door. I think they're going to break in. Hide somewhere in the house and keep talking to me on the phone." "No, I can't stay on the phone. If they catch me talking to you, they might hurt you too. Joe, I need you to know that I love you more than anyone. You were the only man who ever saw me as a real person, not just a pretty face." "Marilyn, don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. I'm leaving for the airport right now. Promise me something, Joe. If they kill me tonight, promise me you'll investigate what really happened. Promise me you'll tell the world that Marilyn Monroe was murdered because she refused to stay quiet about government corruption." "I promise, Marilyn. But you're going to be alive when I get there and we'll figure this out together. I love you, Joe. I've always loved you. Goodbye." The line went dead, and Joe DiMaggio knew in his heart that he had just heard the last words Marilyn Monroe would ever speak. August 5, 1962, 1:47 a.m. Joe DiMaggio's taxi arrived at Marilyn's Brentwood mansion, and the scene outside confirmed his worst fears. Police cars filled the street. Ambulances were parked in the driveway. Reporters and photographers were taking pictures and asking questions. Neighbors stood in their front yards trying to understand what had happened to Hollywood's most famous resident. Joe pushed through the crowd and approached the first police officer he could find. "Officer, I'm Joe DiMaggio. Marilyn Monroe called me 2 hours ago and said she was in danger. What happened to her?" "Mr. DiMaggio, I'm sorry to tell you that Miss Monroe is dead. We received a call from her housekeeper around midnight saying she found Miss Monroe unconscious in her bedroom. Paramedics tried to revive her, but it was too late." Joe felt like the world was spinning around him. The woman he loved was dead, and he had arrived hours too late to save her. How did she die? What killed her? "It appears to be suicide, sir. Miss Monroe took a large quantity of sleeping pills. We found several empty pill bottles next to her bed. Joe immediately knew something was wrong with the official story. Suicide. That's impossible. I talked to her 2 hours ago, and she was afraid for her life. She said 3 men in dark suits outside her house were planning to kill her. The police officer looked uncomfortable. Sir, I understand you're upset, but our investigation shows Miss Monroe took her own life. There's no sign of murder. What about the 3 men she saw outside her house? Did you investigate them? Mr. DiMaggio, there were no men outside Miss Monroe's house. The only people here tonight were Miss Monroe, her housekeeper, and her psychiatrist. Joe realized the police were either part of the cover-up, or they were being lied to by people with more authority than they had. I want to see Marilyn's body. I want to see where she died. I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. This is an active crime scene. Crime scene? I thought you said it was suicide. The officer realized his mistake. I mean, it's an active investigation scene. We can't allow unauthorized people inside the house. But Joe DiMaggio wasn't just anyone. He was one of the most famous people in America, and he used his celebrity status to gain access to the house where the woman he loved had died. August 5, 1962, 2:15 a.m. Joe DiMaggio entered Marilyn's bedroom and immediately knew she had been murdered. Marilyn was lying on her bed in a perfectly straight position with her arms at her sides and legs together. People who die from drug overdoses don't arrange themselves so neatly. They collapse wherever they happen to be when the drugs take effect. Marilyn's face was peaceful, showing no signs of the violent convulsions and vomiting that occur during fatal overdoses. She looked like she was simply sleeping. Most importantly, there was no glass of water anywhere in the bedroom. According to the official story, Marilyn had swallowed dozens of pills, but there was no liquid she could have used to wash them down. Joe also noticed that Marilyn's bedroom had been searched. Drawers were open, papers were scattered on the floor, and her personal belongings were in disarray. Someone had been looking for something after she died. Joe leaned down and whispered in Marilyn's ear, "I know they murdered you, and I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving it. I will tell everyone that you died because you refused to be silenced by powerful people who saw you as a threat." Then Joe stood up and made a statement that shocked everyone in the room. Marilyn Monroe was murdered by government agents because she possessed evidence that could have destroyed the Kennedy administration. This was not a suicide. This was an assassination. August 5, 1962, 2:30 a.m. Joe's accusation of murder sent shockwaves through the police officers, coroners, and other officials in Marilyn's house. Detective Sergeant Robert Byron, who was leading the investigation, tried to convince Joe that he was wrong about murder. "Mr. DiMaggio, I understand you're grieving, but making accusations like that without evidence is very serious. We found no signs of violence, no signs of struggle, and no indication that anyone else was in this house tonight. What about the 3 men Marilyn saw outside her house? Did you even bother to look for them?" "We canvassed the entire neighborhood, Mr. DiMaggio. No one saw any men in dark suits or any suspicious activity." Joe realized that either the neighbors were lying or the men Marilyn had seen were professionals who knew how to avoid detection. "What about Marilyn's diary? She told me she was keeping a record of everything she knew about government corruption. Where is that diary now?" Detective Byron looked confused. "What diary? We haven't found any diary." "Then someone took it after she died. Marilyn specifically told me she was keeping detailed records of her conversations with President Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. That diary would have contained evidence of government corruption and organized crime connections." "Mr. DiMaggio, you're making very serious accusations about the President of the United States. Do you have any proof to support these claims?" "The proof was in Marilyn's diary, and now that diary has conveniently disappeared. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" Joe realized that the local police were either incompetent or they were being controlled by federal authorities who wanted Marilyn's death ruled a suicide. August 5, 1962, 3:45 a.m. As Joe DiMaggio prepared to leave Marilyn's house, he was approached by a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Agent Thompson from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "Mr. DiMaggio, we understand you've been making public statements suggesting Miss Monroe was murdered. We want you to know that such statements could be very dangerous for your personal safety." Joe stared at the FBI agent with disgust. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all, sir. We're simply advising you to be very careful about spreading conspiracy theories that could damage national security." Sometimes people who make unfounded accusations about government officials find themselves facing serious legal consequences. "Let me make something very clear to you," Joe said, his voice filled with controlled anger. "I'm not some scared Hollywood actor who can be intimidated into silence. I'm Joe DiMaggio, and I've never backed down from anyone in my life. Marilyn Monroe called me 2 hours before she died and told me government agents were planning to kill her. Now she's dead, and you're here trying to silence me. That tells me everything I need to know about who's responsible for her murder." Agent Thompson smiled coldly. "Mr. DiMaggio, you're a famous man with a reputation to protect. It would be unfortunate if that reputation were damaged by association with unpatriotic conspiracy theories. Famous people have been known to lose their endorsement deals, business opportunities, and public respect when they make statements considered unpatriotic." Joe stepped closer to the agent until they were face to face. "If you think you can threaten me into silence, you're going to learn that you picked the wrong man to intimidate. I will spend the rest of my life investigating Marilyn's murder, and I will tell everyone who will listen that she was killed by the same government she trusted." The FBI agent walked away without another word, but Joe knew that powerful forces would now be working to discredit him and prevent him from exposing the truth about Marilyn's death. August 6, 1962. Morning headlines across America. Every major newspaper in the country carried the story of Marilyn Monroe's death, but they all reported it the same way: Marilyn Monroe found dead of overdose. Hollywood star commits suicide. Tragic end for America's sweetheart. Only one newspaper mentioned Joe DiMaggio's murder accusations, and they treated his statements as the emotional outburst of a grieving ex-husband rather than serious allegations deserving investigation. Joe realized that the same people who had killed Marilyn were now controlling how her death was being reported to the American public. The official story would be suicide, and anyone who suggested otherwise would be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. But Joe had made a promise to Marilyn during their final phone call, and he intended to keep that promise regardless of the personal cost. August 8, 1962, Marilyn Monroe's funeral. Joe DiMaggio took complete control of the funeral arrangements, and his decisions revealed how much he blamed Hollywood and the government for Marilyn's death. Joe banned everyone from Hollywood who he believed had exploited Marilyn during her lifetime. No studio executives, no agents, no managers, and no actors who had used her for their own benefit. Joe also banned all political figures, including anyone connected to the Kennedy administration. He wanted to make it clear that he held the government responsible for Marilyn's murder. Joe limited the funeral to 30 people. Marilyn's family members and a few genuine friends who had cared about her as a person rather than as a commodity. Joe's most symbolic decision was his choice of flowers. Instead of the elaborate arrangements typical of Hollywood funerals, Joe ordered hundreds of white roses. The entire chapel was filled with white roses, creating a sea of pure white that represented the innocence Marilyn had lost during her years in Hollywood. When reporters asked Joe about the white roses, his answer became one of the most quoted statements in entertainment history. Marilyn loved white roses because they represented purity and truth. She died because she was trying to tell the truth about corruption in high places. These roses are my promise that her truth will eventually be revealed. August 10, 1962. 2 days after Marilyn's funeral, Joe DiMaggio began his lifelong investigation into her murder by hiring the best private detectives in California. Joe's investigators discovered evidence that police had either ignored or deliberately overlooked. Marilyn's house had been thoroughly searched after her death, with her personal papers, photographs, and diary mysteriously disappearing before police arrived. Several neighbors had seen expensive cars with government license plates parked near Marilyn's house on the night she died, but none had been interviewed by police. Marilyn's phone records from August 4 had been confiscated by federal agents and were never made available to local law enforcement. The coroner who performed Marilyn's autopsy had been pressured to rule the death a suicide despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Most disturbing of all, Joe's investigators learned that Marilyn had been under surveillance by both FBI and CIA agents for several months before her death because of her relationships with President Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Joe realized that Marilyn's murder had been planned and executed by professional killers working for people powerful enough to control police investigations, manipulate coroner reports, and silence news coverage. September 1962, 1 month after Marilyn's death, Joe DiMaggio's investigation was interrupted by a series of incidents clearly designed to discourage him from seeking the truth. Joe's hotel room in Los Angeles was burglarized, with thieves taking only his files related to Marilyn's death investigation. Nothing else was touched. Joe's car was vandalized while he was meeting with private investigators, with all 4 tires slashed and threatening messages left on the windshield. Joe received anonymous phone calls warning him that accidents happen to people who ask too many questions about national security matters. But instead of intimidating Joe, these threats only convinced him that he was getting close to exposing the people who had killed Marilyn. Joe made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would never stop investigating Marilyn's murder, no matter how dangerous it became for him personally. October 1962 through March 1999. For 36 years until his own death, Joe DiMaggio quietly investigated Marilyn Monroe's murder while publicly maintaining that she had been killed by government conspirators. Joe never remarried and never had another serious romantic relationship. He dedicated his life to seeking justice for the woman who had been murdered because she possessed evidence that could have exposed corruption at the highest levels of American government. Every year on August 5th, the anniversary of Marilyn's death, Joe would visit her grave at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery and place dozens of white roses on her headstone. This annual tradition continued for 36 years, creating one of the most touching love stories in American history. Joe's consistency proved to everyone that his love for Marilyn was genuine, and that his belief in her murder was not just an emotional reaction to grief, but a conviction based on evidence and investigation. During those 36 years, Joe accumulated substantial evidence that Marilyn had been murdered by a conspiracy involving CIA agents, FBI informants, and organized crime figures working on behalf of people connected to the Kennedy administration. Joe discovered that Marilyn had been planning to hold a press conference on August 6, 1962, the day after she died, where she intended to reveal classified information she had learned during her relationships with President Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Joe learned that Marilyn had possessed photographs and documents proving that the Kennedy brothers were sharing government secrets with organized crime bosses in exchange for political and financial support. Joe found witnesses who had seen Marilyn's diary, which contained detailed records of conversations she had overheard during private parties at the White House, including discussions about plans to assassinate foreign leaders. Joe even discovered evidence that Marilyn had been secretly cooperating with honest FBI agents who were investigating corruption within the Kennedy administration, making her death beneficial to multiple powerful groups. But despite 36 years of investigation, Joe never found enough evidence to convince law enforcement to reopen the case or to prove his allegations in a court of law. The people who had ordered Marilyn's murder were too powerful, too well connected, and too skilled at covering their tracks. March 8, 1999, the day Joe DiMaggio died. Joe was in a Florida hospital, dying of lung cancer, when he called his lawyer and dictated his final statement about Marilyn Monroe's murder. "I have spent 36 years investigating the murder of Marilyn Monroe, and I know with absolute certainty that she was killed by agents working for people at the highest levels of the United States government. Marilyn was murdered because she possessed evidence of corruption, criminal activity, and treason that would have destroyed the Kennedy family and exposed the connections between the White House and organized crime. The people who killed her believed they could silence her forever, but they were wrong. As long as people remember Marilyn Monroe, they will remember that she died because she refused to be intimidated by powerful men who saw her as expendable. I never remarried because no other woman could compare to Marilyn, and because I felt obligated to spend my life seeking justice for the most innocent and beautiful woman I ever knew. I am releasing this statement after my death, because I want the world to know that Joe DiMaggio died believing that Marilyn Monroe was murdered, and that the people responsible have never been held accountable for their crime. If anyone continues my investigation after I'm gone, I hope they will remember that Marilyn's real crime was believing that in America, even the most powerful people could be forced to tell the truth." Joe DiMaggio died on March 8, 1999, and his final statement about Marilyn's murder was released to the news media the following day, creating headlines around the world. August 4, 1962, Marilyn Monroe screamed on the phone, "3 men are standing outside my window and they're coming to kill me." 2 hours later she was dead, and Joe's 36-year investigation proved that America's sweetheart was murdered by the same government agents she had trusted with her secrets. Joe DiMaggio showed the world that true love never gives up seeking justice, even when the most powerful people in the country are working to cover up the truth. If this incredible story of love, conspiracy, and the search for justice moved you, Subscribe for more untold stories of how famous people were silenced by the government agencies that were supposed to protect them. Like this video if you believe Joe DiMaggio was right about Marilyn's murder. And comment below, do you think powerful people in government are still eliminating threats to their power? Next week we're revealing another story of how someone died under suspicious circumstances after threatening to expose government corruption. Remember, when someone with dangerous knowledge dies suddenly, there's usually someone with the power to arrange that death, but sometimes love and determination are stronger than conspiracy and cover-up.